Hi, Jordan again. This is the next video in the series explaining the rules to Blood and Plunder. This video is going to concentrate on Chapter 7, Artillery. In Blood and Plunder, there are two types of artillery, cannons and swivel guns, or swivels for short. Swivels are basically anti-personnel artillery, so they cannot be fired at structures, only units, or ship's rigging. But they can be used for a defensive attack, which can be pretty lethal. There are three different sizes of cannons: light, medium, and heavy. These are longer range artillery that can damage structures and decimate unprotected units. As we start going over some of the requirements and stats of artillery, it might help to look at the chart on page 77. In order to use artillery, a crew must be assigned to that artillery and remain cohesive with that same piece. The unit assigned to the guns will be the only unit that can fire, reload, or move them, unless of course they're reassigned or end up more than 12 inches away from the artillery at the end of the activation. Remember, artillery that is abandoned or unassigned must have a unit assigned to it before it can be used. And this can be any abandoned artillery, regardless of which side originally had possession of it. Also, when it comes time to assign crew to artillery, make sure they're not on a horse. Only mounted units that are prone can crew cannons, and since you can't have a prone mounted unit, I guess they can't use artillery. Anytime a swivel gun fires, it takes 2 reload markers. Any other artillery piece will receive 4 reload markers. It seems like a lot, but think about it. Cannons took a while to reload and nobody had invented the Gatling cannon yet. Artillery can be fired by a single model in a unit. Reloading, however, takes a few more. Firing a cannon is easy, reloading it is the tough part. A unit may reload as many artillery pieces as it can effectively crew, and those reloads happen simultaneously. When you have at least minimum crew, each reload action removes 1 reload marker. If there are less than minimum crew, it really cripples your ability to reload. If you try and reload with less than minimum crew, reloading becomes a dedicated action, and you only remove 1 counter, regardless of the actions you might have had during that activation. For this reason, it's always a good idea to have a few extra crew in the units assigned to cannons. Also, a cannon that is partially reloaded and then reassigned to another unit must start the reload process all over. Now, in this example, the Sea Dogs have fired their cannons and acquired 4 reload markers for each cannon. They use their last activation to remove 1 of the reload markers on 1 cannon. Since they do not meet the minimum requirement for both cannons, they can only reload 1 at a time. Now, the Lanceros have rushed in, and after a decisive melee victory, they take control of the cannon by using an assignment action on their next activation. At this point, the reload markers turn from 3 back to 4, and the Lanceros will require 4 reload actions to get this baby firing. Artillery that is in structures, including ships, cannot be moved unless dictated by a scenario. If the artillery is on a field carriage, with the exception of heavy cannons, they can be moved. However, cannons that have been moved cannot fire that same activation. Situations like this where command points come in handy. Hint, hint. Moving artillery reduces a unit's move distance and requires a minimum crew to do so. Swivels and light cannons on field carriages will move with a -1 movement penalty, and mediums on field carriages will move with a -2 movement penalty. With less than minimum crew, the carriage can only pivot. Artillery on field carriages cannot climb, be picked up, or pulled over anything that is 1 inch high or taller. Also, a field carriage may be moved into a structure, provided it has a door, not a window, big enough to physically move it through. Also good to know, when manning a field carriage, that carriage can provide cover to models. Artillery that is in structures can only be destroyed with critical damage, and these tables are found in Chapter 6. Artillery on field carriages cannot be targeted by small arms or swivels but they do count as models in the unit when being targeted by cannons. Yes, that means that field carriages can and must be removed as casualties if hit by opposing cannon fire. Artillery on field carriages in cover receive the standard 6+ range save. Also, any of my fans that watched me in the Chapter 4 video should remember that a crew has the ability to spike their cannons. This keeps the gun from falling into enemy hands and renders it useless for the rest of the game. Any unit that is within 1 inch of an abandoned artillery can attempt to spike it, and it does remain on the battlefield until it is destroyed by some other means. Alrighty. Now we get to the fun stuff. The oxidizing effect of salt water on iron versus bronze. Just kidding. Alright, let's talk about making a ranged attack on a unit not in a structure. First, check the line of sight and arc of fire. Swivel guns have a 360-degree arc of fire, while cannons on ships have an arc of fire the width of the deck that it is on. Cannon fire on ships will be explained a little more in the next video. Now, arc of fire of artillery on land is a 45-degree arc from each side of the center line of the gun barrel, so 90 degrees total. The ship turning gauge can be a helpful tool to help you figure this out, as the line between windward and in the wind's eye is 45 degrees. The pivoting of the cannon is a virtual pivot when you target a unit. You do not actually pivot the cannon. A physical turn of the gun is considered a move action. Cannons that are within gun emplacements are in a fixed position and cannot move. Now, they still contain the total 90-degree arc of fire, but cannot physically turn. If the unit making the attack has more than one artillery piece, you would need to decide which pieces to fire. The artillery must not have any reload markers in order to make a ranged attack. There are no artillery that can half fire. And remember, a unit cannot fire artillery if during the same activation the unit has moved, if they moved the field carriage, or they were engaged in melee combat. Now, once you decide which guns to fire, check the distance. The range penalty for all artillery is the same as small arms at +1 per 4 inches. The base number for all cannons is 0, 6 for swivels, and the target number is determined by the range penalty plus base number. So yes, cannons are devastating at short distances. In addition, cannons have exceptional range. If your target number is 11 plus, you can still hit your target on a natural 10. However, no lucky hits are scored when your target number is this high. Lucky hits, though, are going to be explained a little more later in the video. Well, now that you know how to figure your target number, you actually get to roll some dice. The unit spends 1 action to make a ranged attack, and the attacker rolls 1 d10 per cannon regardless of the type of cannon. However, swivel guns would roll 3 d10s for each one being fired. So, here if the unit in the longboat fires the swivel gun at the milicianos in the forest, they would roll 3 dice and they actually need 8s to hit. So, after our dice roll here, we've got, looks like 1 hit on the milicianos. If all the guns you fire are the same, you would roll all the dice together. However, if you're firing different types of guns, make sure to roll them separately or have different colors assigned to different guns. And a reminder, if you attempt a second ranged attack during the crew's activation, that unit will gain a fatigue. The roll for the shoot test is used to determine initial hits and is a separate dice roll from the additional hits roll. So if you were to use a fortune point, you could re-roll the initial test or the additional hits roll, but not both. If your initial shoot test is successful, then you can roll more dice for additional hits. That number depends on the type of cannon that you fired. So 2 extra dice per hit for light cannons, 3 extra for mediums, and 4 extra for those destructive heavies. Think of the whole dice rolling process like this. The first roll is to see if your cannon shot hits, and the additional rolls are to see the amount of destruction it causes. So let's do an example here. Let's have the Sea Dogs fire the cannons from the gun emplacement. They're going to fire both cannons that have arc of fire on the marineros. Notice that they have 1 light cannon and 1 medium cannon. The light cannon will be represented by the red die, and the medium cannon will have the orange. After measuring the distance, the Sea Dogs only needed 2 to hit. So the first roll results in... Seriously?
All I know how
I kid you not, guys. He has done this 5 or 6 times in a row. But wait. What a perfect time to use a fortune point. All right.
Yeah, there it is.
There we go. So Kevin is going to roll those 2 again. And the second result, which has to stay, is exactly the same. That is truly amazing.
I want to use another fortune. What if I use a lot of fortune points?
Even if you wanted to use all of your fortune points here, Kevin, you only get 1 reroll per dice roll. So you are stuck with that terrible roll of 1 hit. And that was the, what is that, the light cannon?
And medium cannon. I missed.
All right. So he's going to roll a couple extra dice here for his light cannons that he would now get additional hits for the light cannon. In fact, he has 4 total hits here. And I'm sure you're asking how. Anytime you're firing artillery at a unit that is not protected by a structure and you roll a natural 10, that hit results in, it basically counts as 2 instead of 1. Again, units out in the open do not fare well against cannon, guys. And one last thing, after firing your artillery, just make sure to add the appropriate amount of reload markers to those cannons. Now the opposing player has a chance to make saves against those hits. The defending unit may attempt 1 range save per model in the unit, but cannot attempt more saves than hits taken. And whether or not all models are in cover will affect the values needed. If all models are in cover, then simply determine 1 value needed for the save and roll the appropriate number of dice. So let's go back to our unit of marineros. Due to some epically poor dice rolling, they only receive 4 hits. Since they have 4 models in the unit, they can attempt to save all of the hits. The stack of logs there provides cover, so the target number needed would be their shoot save value, which is 7. Kevin's going to roll some dice here. He's going to roll 4 dice.
Yay!
And how many successes there, Kevin?
Looks like 2 there, Chief.
All right, so he has 2 successes, so he would remove 2 models as casualties and continue on with fatigue. However, let's change the scenario up a bit. If some models in the unit are in cover and some are not, it changes the outcome a little bit. First, you would count the number of models in cover, and in this case, 2 of the marineros are in cover. You then roll saves for the hits equal to that number of models in cover, using their shoot save value as the target number. And now Kevin rolls 2 dice with a shoot save value of 7. Let's see. And it looks like he didn't save either one. All right. Now, if there's any hits left over, they can be attempted to be saved by applying the standard range save value of 9+. So here he's going to roll 2 more at the standard range save. And doesn't save either of those either. So Kevin would actually remove 4 models as casualties. Now, as the defending player, Kevin would have discretion over which models he would remove. However, in this case, he'd remove all 4, and it really doesn't matter. And also, don't forget that if you have any models left over, that you need to roll for fatigue. Firing cannons at structures is similar to firing at units, with a few additional factors: fortitude and integrity. The fortitude being the measure of how difficult it is for artillery to damage it, and the integrity is the amount of damage a structure can take before the fortitude is lowered. So in Blood and Plunder, the more you hit a structure, the easier it becomes to damage it. Every time a structure is fired upon, each successful hit results in a point of damage. This can be kept track of on a ship's card or a separate piece of paper. You can see here the ship's card has the appropriate amount of bubbles to track your stats. Or you can make your own, kind of like this one here. All right, now let's do an example and say this field carriage with the milicianos fires the medium cannon at the gun emplacement. The gun emplacement has a fortitude of 5 and an integrity of 4. Now we're going to have Fred roll this time since we need to demonstrate what happens when you actually hit something. Because the range penalty is +3 and the fortitude is 5, the base number needed to hit is an 8. So now he knows his target number, and his first roll results in...
Fire!
A hit. All right. So, now that his initial hit is successful, he's going to roll a few more dice. And those result in 3 more hits. So, he actually has a total of 4 hits on the emplacement. So now you're going to mark the number of hits on the piece of paper, starting at the top left, marking left to right, and working down. You'll notice it will lower the fortitude from 5 to 4. The resulting fortitude rating is determined immediately after all current damage has been resolved. This is important for future attacks against the structure or when applying critical hits. Also remember, a structure's fortitude can never be below 1. Now, if there's at least 1 unit within the structure, it might also take a hit. When a structure section that contains a unit is damaged, for each point of damage the structure takes, those hits are also applied to the unit or units in that section. When there are multiple units in a structure section, the hits get divided up evenly between them. So back to our example here, the gun emplacement took 4 points of damage, so the number of hits would be divided up between the freebooters and the militia, 2 for each unit. If there were an odd number of hits, the defending player would assign that odd number hit as they desire. Those units take the appropriate saves, remove casualties, and roll for fatigue as usual. Structures are pretty tough and are not destroyed by normal damage. They have to be destroyed by critical damage, which comes in 2 forms, lucky hits and critical hits. Lucky hits occur when a player rolls at least 1 natural 10 for a shoot test with artillery targeted at a structure. Now, if you fire at a structure and your target number needed is 11 plus, a lucky hit is scored when 2 natural 10s are rolled, not just 1. When a lucky hit occurs, roll just 1 die no matter how many 10s you rolled, and check the critical damage table for the appropriate structure. Subtract 1 from the roll and see what the final result is. The tables can be found in Chapter 6 or 13 of the rulebook. And if for some reason the result of a lucky hit causes you to roll a die for another critical damage table, make sure to subtract 1 from that as well. Critical hits occur when the number of hits are greater than or equal to twice the fortitude of a structure. If a structure's fortitude is 2 and it takes 5 hits, you would roll 1 die on the critical hits table since 5 is greater than or equal to 4. Now in this case, in order to roll 2 dice on the critical hits table, you would actually need 8 hits. It is important to remember that fortitude can change after the initial damage. So, if you have 6 hits on a structure that has a fortitude of 4 and the fortitude gets lowered to 3 after all damage has been applied, the result would be 1 critical hit, since you have now doubled the current fortitude. One more reminder. An attack on a structure can produce only 1 lucky hit no matter the number of 10s rolled, but you can potentially score multiple critical hits on 1 attack. Alright, now let's have a quick summary of artillery pieces. Remember that artillery comes in 2 types, cannons and swivels. Both need to have crew assigned to them to fire and reload. Cannons have exceptional range and can attempt a shoot test even if the target number is 11 plus. Yes, it means that you could hit if you would need a 12, a 22, or even a 162. Yeah, even at 54 actual feet away, you could still hit on a 10. Just remember it takes 2 10s to score lucky hits when needing such a high target number. Swivels are designed for closer range and have a base target number of 6 plus for shoot tests. Cannons have an arc of fire of either 90 total degrees or the width of the ship deck it's on, while swivels have 360 degree arc of fire. Cannons are lethal against unprotected units. If a unit that is not in a structure is hit by cannons, any natural 10 rolled during the shoot test will count as 2 hits. When it comes to using swivels, artillery-related special rules, like artillery crew, may apply, but not the special rules that would apply to small arms. Swivels can attack the same targets as small arms would, units and ship's rigging. Swivel guns can be moved around within a structure section. However, they cannot be moved out of the section in which they were originally placed. Lastly, don't forget about saving those swivels for a defensive attack, at the cost of 1 fatigue when being charged. And no, You cannot defensive fire with cannons, unless of course they're being manned by a unit of prone horses, and if that's the case, you can do whatever you want with it. And if you need to double check any artillery stats, that chart can still be found on page 77 of the Blood and Plunder rule book. Alright, well that was the explanation of Chapter 7, Artillery. And if you guys have any other questions about artillery, feel free to visit the forums at firelockgames.com.